joined the design team at Lancaster Theological Seminary because I love worship, because I love coming together with other people in my community to worship. The challenge for us here is that we all come from different worship backgrounds, as opposed to when you're raised in a church and you just always go, it's always the same every Sunday. We have a lot of variety here, and we need to honor all that comes into our worship space each week. So the design team is being very intentional about what we put into the worship, who we speak for, how we listen to God, how we address the challenges, how we issue comfort each week. It's different for each person who sits in the pews. It's different for each person who leads. And so our challenge, which is kind of Herculean, is to create a worship service that creates a space where people can intersect with God for that hour, where we can be present in a holy space, listening to God, understanding our challenges, receiving our comfort, receiving redemption, and then going back out into the world inspired, rejuvenated, and ready for the tasks that are ahead, whether it's our classes or whether it's graduated from here and going on into a church of our own or some other kind of ministerial setting of our own. So the worship for me is the opportunity for us to just get at the heart of the matter. What is God placing on you this week? What is God calling you toward in the days ahead? And can we as a design team provide a worship where you can come in and be assured of God's love, God's assurance, that we get to the heart of the matter for you sometime along these 9 months within these 2 semesters, that the worship we create enables you to enter into that holy space where you can listen to God and be received by God.
For me, the definition of worship is our act of praising God. And that takes different forms. It can be individual worship, something that we do for ourselves, just us, and that can be silent prayer, meditation. It can be a walk through nature. It can be music, which certainly is important for me. But the worship planning team is focusing on a different type of worship, and that's corporate worship. And that's a crucial part of our life here at LTS. We're all studying to be in the ministry in some capacity. And so worship, regardless of what our primary vocation is going to be, is central to our lives. And this community here at LTS is very diverse. That's a gift, and it's what brought me to LTS above all else. But it's also a challenge. And so in establishing the worship planning team, we've made sure that the team itself is very diverse. And we have people from different traditions, different backgrounds, that speak different languages, so that we can bring those diverse elements into our craft of worship. Because we feel the worship that we experience in this space has to reflect the lives of everyone here, everyone represented in this community. Because God, in God's self, is diverse. God created humanity to be diverse, and so it's very important that we experience worship in a diverse way.
Worship really entails sort of the sacred space that happens as people come together in community and really reverence the divine and bear witness to all of the ways that the divine is at work in our lives individually as well as collectively. In terms of sort of what I hope this worship team accomplishes, one is this is an extremely diverse community. And part of what I think our charge is and how I understand our charge is to shape worship experiences that reflect the diversity of our community, while at the same time aim to minister to the needs of our community. This is not only an academic institution, it's also a worshiping community. And so to that end, crafting liturgies, bringing in music and other performing arts that really reflect the broader, Christian traditions is really important as well in terms of some of the things that we hope to accomplish. With regard to sort of LTS and our own context, I think we are positioned in a really, really cool and interesting context in that there is this confluence of tradition. And as an ecumenical seminary, even with an affiliation with the United Church of Christ, part of what we are doing in worship in this context is really stuff that we can't do in our own original context. So our worship here really is a reflection of the community that's gathered here. And our hope is that as students, faculty, administrators, and staff have an opportunity to participate in worship in this context, that they leave with sort of perspectives, that they leave with new ideas and better ways of engaging their own traditions in their congregations or their home churches. So I think that's one of the opportunities about worshiping within this context and sort of what it means for all of us to come to the table together.
Aidan Kavanaugh, the liturgical theologian who's quite well known for his work on liturgical theology, describes worship as the church's faith in motion. And that's the sort of guiding principle that I have when I think about worship in our context as well as in Christian communities. The challenge is that in a context like ours, where the faith that we come to the seminary with is so varied, it's hard to imagine what worship might look like in that context. But ultimately, I believe that's the challenge, and that is the mandate for this new chapel team that we formed this year. In the process of putting this idea together, I talked about creating a chapel team in place of having a dean of the chapel, as we had before, with the faculty and with the administrative cabinet, getting their sense of would a team approach be better to worship planning in our chapel rather than simply having that guided by a dean of the chapel or by a single professor. There seemed to be general agreement about this, and so my decision was, instead of picking the entire team myself, which I could have done easily, I decided that it would be better for me to pick the head of the team and then work with that person who would help me create a diverse group that would be responsible for planning worship for Lancaster Theological Seminary for the coming year. One of the things that I have been thinking about as I put the team together, or as Nick Peterson and I put the team together, was that there were certain mandates, or at least certain expectations, that we would bring to the group as they planned worship for the year. For the past couple of years, worship planning has been shared in part by members of the Introduction to Worship class that meets in the fall. And in fact, much of the time that was spent in that class was spent on planning worship for the community. And that model, while it was helpful in many ways, one of the other challenges was it didn't address some of the needs that we had for the spring semester. And it also meant that the people in the Introduction to Worship class weren't able to study other things that they needed to study. So what I've decided is that as the professor for the Introduction to Worship class this fall, we wouldn't be sharing in the actual worship planning process for seminary and chapel, but we would be asking the chapel planning team to consult with the worship class about various aspects of worship. And so when we're getting ready to plan what Lent will look like at Lancaster Theological Seminary this year, we're going to be asking the members of the Introduction to Worship class to participate in that process and to do some brainstorming with members of the worship team. In addition, we will be asking the members of the worship class to do some performance analysis of some of the things that are happening in chapel. So they'll get some experience not only evaluating or assessing worship, but also have the opportunity to analyze the performance and the impact of particular liturgical performances. In the past, we've had worship planning done in a variety of ways. Sometimes worship has been planned by the ministerial formation groups. Sometimes chapel has been planned by a faculty member with a assigned group of students. Sometimes chapel worship has been planned according to denominational affiliation, so groups of Presbyterians or Baptists or members of the United Church of Christ have gathered together to plan worship. And while those models offer benefits, the challenges of those models is that they tend to turn our common worship life into a series of episodes where week to week you never know what will happen in chapel or what you'll experience. So one of the challenges for the community is then it's hard for us to get a sense about who we are as a community if our worship experience is different every week. So the primary mandate of this planning team is to plan worship specifically for the members of the community of Lancaster Theological Seminary. And our membership is diverse. Nearly 20 different denominations are represented amongst the students, faculty, staff, trustees. So their job is to think about what should and could worship look like in this particular context. Who are the people who are gathering before God? Who are the people that will pray together? Who are the people who are members of this community? And to construct and craft worship that is representative of the community.